What if your loved one's dementia symptoms could be detected hours or even days before anyone noticed? Meet Margaret. Margaret isn't a real person. She's a fictional character, but her story is based on situations that millions of families experience every day. For the past few nights, Margaret has been sleeping a little less. She starts pacing the hallway at 3 a.m. instead of 6 a.m. She lingers by the front door a little longer than usual, and during breakfast, she asks the same question 4 times instead of two. None of these changes seem dramatic on their own. Her daughter simply thinks she's having an off day. But what if these tiny changes weren't random? What if they were early warning signs that Margaret was becoming agitated long before anybody could see it? Researchers around the world are beginning to ask exactly that question. And surprisingly, the answer may not come from a robot that understands dementia. It may come from artificial intelligence that simply notices when something has changed. Today, we're exploring where dementia care could be heading, what the latest research actually shows, and why the future of care may be spotting subtle changes before they become a crisis. Chapter 1: Why dementia behavior can seem to change overnight. If you cared for someone with dementia, you probably experienced this. One day, everything seems relatively calm. The next, your loved one becomes agitated, withdrawn, anxious, or awake throughout the night. It can feel as though behavior appeared out of nowhere, but in many cases, they didn't. Clinicians refer to these changes as behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, often shortened for BPSD. According to the International Psychogeriatric Association, these symptoms include behavioral changes such as agitation, aggression, wandering, repetitive behaviors, sleep disturbances, and apathy, alongside psychological symptoms like anxiety, depression, hallucination, and delusions. These symptoms affect most people with dementia at some stage of the disease and can have a profound impact on both individuals and their family. These symptoms don't just make day to day life more difficult, they are associated with faster cognitive decline, more hospital admissions, earlier admission to nursing homes, and greater stress on family carers. They also increase pressure on already stretched health and social care services. So, why are they so difficult to detect early? The answer is that dementia behavior is influenced by far more than changes in the brain. Researchers describe BPSD as multifactorial, meaning it can be shaped by biological changes, emotional well being, the person's environment, physical health, pain, poor sleep, and even how overstimulating or unfamiliar their surroundings are. Imagine Margaret again. Perhaps she sleeps 30 minutes less tonight. Tomorrow she wakes up around the kitchen more often. The following day, she becomes slightly quieter than usual. Individually, none of these changes could necessarily concern you, but together they may form a pattern. The problem is that humans aren't particularly good at spotting patterns that develop slowly or over several days. We remember dramatic events, but we're less likely to notice dozens of tiny changes spread across a week. That's one reason why early detection is so challenging. Sophia Fernandez from the School of Health Sciences at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts Western Switzerland explains that early signs are often subtle, temporary, and easily mistaken for normal aging or simply having a bad day. Standard assessment tools can also be time consuming and aren't always practical in everyday care. And that's where artificial intelligence is beginning to change the conversation. Chapter 2: The Surprising Way AI is Learning to Understand Dementia. When people hear the word artificial intelligence, they imagine something almost human, a computer that thinks, reasons, and somehow understands dementia. But that's not what the most promising research is showing. In fact, here's the biggest surprise: AI doesn't need to understand dementia. It only needs to notice that something has changed. That simple idea sits at the heart of a 2025 scoping review by Sofia Fernandez. alongside colleagues from Lausanne University Hospital and the University of Lausanne. After screening more than 3,600 scientific papers, the researchers found just 12 real world studies that specifically investigated AI technologies for the early detection of behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. Most of the systems didn't try to diagnose dementia. Instead, they looked for changes in everyday behavior that might suggest someone needed attention. Think about Margaret again. An AI system doesn't know whether she's happy, frightened, or confused. It doesn't understand memories. It doesn't recognize emotions in the way another person does. Instead, it quietly asks questions like, is Margaret walking more than usual? Has her sleep changed? Is she spending longer in one room? Is her speech different today? Has her daily routine drifted away from what she normally does? Those questions might sound simple, but together they can reveal patterns that are almost impossible for a human to track continuously. When we developed GGCare, we found ourselves thinking in a remarkably similar way. We weren't trying to build technology that understood dementia. Instead, we wanted to recognize changes in a person's normal routine. If someone's sleep became unusually disrupted, that change could trigger an AI phone call to check on their well being in the morning. The published research doesn't evaluate GG care, it shouldn't be treated as scientific evidence, but does illustrate how similar principles can be translated into practical tools for supporting people at home. What's striking is how many different research teams have independently reached the same conclusion. The most valuable signal often isn't a single dramatic event. It's a gradual departure from what's normal for that individual. In the next chapter, we'll look at how researchers are teaching AI to spot these changes using four surprisingly ordinary sources of information: watches/wearables, sensors around the home, pattern recognition algorithms, and dashboards that quietly alert carers when something no longer looks quite right. Chapter 3: Four Ways AI Detects Change. So, how exactly does artificial intelligence notice that something has changed? Rather than relying on futuristic robots, most systems combined existing sensors with machine learning algorithms to identify changes in behavior or physiology that might indicate emerging behavioral or psychological symptoms. The most common data sources were wearable devices, environmental sensors, and electronic data recording systems, with most studies focusing on agitation and aggression. Let's return to Margaret. Imagine Margaret wearing a simple smartwatch. It doesn't diagnose dementia. Instead, it's quietly measuring things like movement, heart rate, or activity levels throughout the day. Researchers found that wearable devices could help detect subtle psychological and behavioral changes associated with agitation before those changes become obvious to carers. For example, increased pacing, restlessness, or changes in activity patterns may occur before a person becomes visibly distressed. Machine learning models can learn what is normal for that individual and recognize when something begins to drift away from that baseline. Rather than comparing Margaret with everyone else, the AI compares today's Margaret with yesterday's Margaret. That difference is incredibly important. Now imagine Margaret doesn't wear any technology at all. Instead, her home quietly notices what's happening. Several studies use environmental sensors such as motion detectors, door sensors, and room occupancy sensors to understand daily routines. These systems weren't recording conversations or watching people through cameras. They simply observed patterns of movement around the home. Perhaps Margaret usually sleeps from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. Tonight, she gets out of bed 5 times. Tomorrow, she spends more time wandering between the bedroom and the front door. Individually, these events may not seem unusual, but together they create a pattern. When we're developing Gigi Care, we were thinking about similar patterns. For example, if sleep monitoring data suggested someone had been awake for much of the night, our system can trigger an AI telephone call the following morning to check on their well being. Gigi Care wasn't part of these published studies, but working on the project reinforced just how valuable changes in routine can be compared with single isolated events. This is where artificial intelligence becomes genuinely useful. Humans are excellent at recognizing obvious changes. AI is excellent at recognizing slow, gradual change across thousands of data points. One study might combine sleep information, movement around the home, and wearable data. Another might analyze speech patterns or information already collected within electronic care records. Individually, none of these signals proves that someone is becoming agitated. Together, however, they can reveal trends that would be almost impossible for a busy family member or care worker to calculate mentally. Fernandez and colleagues found that most of the published systems relied on classic machine learning techniques rather than highly complex deep learning models. That matters because it suggests many of the approaches could potentially be implemented using existing technology rather than waiting for entirely new breakthroughs. The AI isn't asking, does Margaret have agitation? It's asking, is Margaret behaving differently from normal? That single shift in thinking changes everything. Finally, all of the information needs to become useful. Carers don't want pages of graphs. They want to know when someone might need help. Several of the studies use dashboards or digital monitoring systems that brought together information from different sources, allowing changes in behavior to be reviewed more easily. Instead of replacing carers' judgment, these symptoms were designed to highlight people who might benefit from closer attention. Imagine Margaret's daughter receiving a simple notification. Margaret's sleep has reduced for 3 consecutive nights, and her overnight movement has increased compared with her normal pattern. That's not a diagnosis. It's simply an invitation to ask, is everything okay? Sometimes the answer might be pain, sometimes it might be an infection, sometimes it might be anxiety, and sometimes there may be nothing wrong at all. But if technology can encourage that conversation before distress escalates, it has already provided something valuable. Chapter 4. Could this actually work? At this point, you might be wondering whether this is genuinely the future of dementia care, or simply another exciting idea that isn't quite ready yet. The honest answer is both. The research is promising, but it's also early. Fernandez and colleagues screened more than 3,600 publications and found only 12 studies that met the criteria for using artificial technology to detect behavioral and psychological symptoms in real world dementia care settings. That's encouraging because it shows researchers are making progress. It's also a reminder that this field is in its infancy. Many of the studies involved relatively small number of participants and used different technologies, making it difficult to compare results directly. Some focused on agitation, others focused on aggression, while symptoms such as anxiety, depression, hallucination, and delusions received much less attention. Another challenge is that behavior doesn't exist in isolation. Remember Margaret. If she sleeps badly tonight, is it because of dementia, or pain, or urinary tract infection, or noisy neighbors, or simply because the weather is unusually warm? Artificial intelligence can recognize that something has changed. It cannot always explain why. That's where human judgment remains essential. One of the most striking findings in the review was that none of the included studies explored the role of nurses or their specific expertise in using these technologies, despite nurses often being central in recognizing and managing behavioral symptoms in dementia care. Fernandez argued that future research should involve healthcare professionals more closely so that these symptoms complement rather than complicate clinical care. Privacy is another important consideration. People living with dementia deserve dignity and independence. Fortunately, Many of the systems described in the review relied on non-invasive technologies, such as motion sensors and wearable devices, rather than continuous video surveillance. That means it's possible to monitor patterns without constantly watching the person themselves. So, should families rush out and buy AI monitoring systems tomorrow? Probably not. The evidence simply isn't strong enough yet. But should researchers continue developing and evaluating these technologies? Absolutely. Because even a small improvement in detecting behavioral changes earlier could make a meaningful difference in the lives of people living with dementia and those who care for them. Chapter 5: The Future of Dementia Care. Let's go back to Margaret one last time. Nothing in this video has suggested that artificial intelligence can replace her daughter, or her nurse, or her doctor. In fact, the research points in exactly the opposite direction. The most promising future isn't one where AI makes decisions on behalf of people. It's one where technology quietly works in the background, helping families and professionals notice the things that are easiest to miss. A slightly shorter night's sleep, a gradual increase in pacing, less conversation, a different daily routine. None of these tell the whole story, but together they may provide an earlier opportunity to ask questions, investigate possible causes, and offer support before distress develops into a crisis. That's why I find the research so exciting. Not because it's about artificial intelligence, but because it's really about giving people more time to understand what's happening, more time to treat reversible problems, more time to support someone with compassion before they become frightened or overwhelmed. As Fernandez and colleagues concluded, artificial intelligence for detecting behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia is an emerging field with considerable potential, but much more research is needed before it could become routine clinical practice. The future of dementia care won't be built on replacing people. It will be built on helping people notice what matters sooner. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If technology could gently alert you that a loved one's behavior has changed, would you find that reassuring or would you find it too intrusive? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy evidence-based videos that explores dementia, healthy aging, and the future of healthcare, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might find it useful. It really helps us reach families, carers, and healthcare professionals. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.